It's 4 past. Let's just get started, and hopefully some more people will join us. Well, once again, welcome. I'm Yvonne Schwab, ACG Silicon Valley CEO. I am excited to present you today's inaugural event for our new executive circle. And today will be our virtual fireside chat, Mastering Leadership in High Growth Startups. For those of you new to ACG Silicon Valley, we are the leading business-to-business networking organization in Silicon Valley, providing connections, thought leadership, and enabling personal and organizational growth. We're part of a worldwide organization offering an array of networking opportunities with 13,000 members in 59 chapters across the world. Wanted to tell you just a couple of events that we have upcoming. We invite you to visit our website, which is new and improved for those of you who have not visited the website in a while. See the full calendar. Tomorrow we have part 2 of our tech trends from Silicon Valley to Silicon Hill with ACG Austin, San Antonio, and ACG San Francisco on SPACs, IPOs, and resulting cultural changes. You don't want to miss that. It's going to be a hot one. On Saturday, we are part of the first nationwide Peloton ride for ACG. So saddle up and ride with us for a good cause. And next week, we have an event on managing international M&A in a sea of disruption in collaboration with Vistra. And we're also hosting a joint event with our sister chapter, ACG Boston, on investment trends from coast to coast. And our round robin networking with ACG San Francisco is also happening next Thursday. So busy week. And of course, this event and the Young Executives Circle would not have been possible without our amazing sponsor, Invest in Bavaria. So thank you so much. And I would now like to introduce you to our moderator today, James Mister. He leads the Bavarian US offices West Coast, the German state US Tech Investment and Innovation Outpost in Silicon Valley. In his role, he advises tech executives on European market entry and expansion in areas such as autonomous vehicles, urban air mobility, quantum computing, fintech, and immersive technologies. James is a go-to market and expansion expert, passionate about enterprise AI, productivity tools, fintech, and urban mobility. Now, without further ado, I will hand over the mic to James. Here you go.
All right. Hi. Hello, everyone. James here. It's nice to see so many faces here, so many smiling faces. I am happy to kick off this ACG Young Executives Circle and having Jeff as my first guest, as our first guest, pardon me. And the topic today will be mastering leadership and high growth startups, which Jeff has a lot of experience in. Just a bit more about me. So I lead the office of the state of Bavaria in Silicon Valley, as Yvonne has said, and cover the whole US West. She has already given a bit about my background, so I won't waste any more time talking about me. I'd rather talk about our guest today and how I know him. So we're both alumni of the same university. That's where we, sort of cross paths, but now in our professional lives, have also crossed paths again, as that usually happens in life, as many can relate to. So I want to give Jeff some time to introduce himself and his professional background very briefly.
Sure. Thank you all for having me. Thank you, James. My name is Jeff Kirchick. I am technically currently unemployed, actually. I worked for 7.5 years at Nextcaller as the first employee there and was the head of sales for Nextcaller. Which is a Y-Combinator company that was acquired by Pindrop Security about a month ago. Pindrop is a unicorn, startup backed by Andreessen Horowitz that's on the path to an IPO, and was very excited to lead Nextcaller to a successful exit. And as part of that transaction, I decided that I wanted to take another swing for the fences and join another tech startup. So I'll be joining Cresta on Monday. Cresta is an artificial intelligence company that deals with customer experience and is just announced last week a $50 million Series B from Sequoia. Their Series A came from Andreessen and Greylock. So I'm really excited about the backing that they have. I'll be a strategic sales director there. And I've been working in sales for a little over a decade. And as James said, I graduated from Princeton. And most recently, I wrote a book. I'll be talking a little bit about some of the themes of the book during this, but it's called Authentic Selling: How to Use the Principles of Sales in Everyday Life. So that's a little bit about me.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jeff. Introduction to yourself, I guess. I guess I wanted to sort of just give the guests our structure for today. So we wanted to sort of also dive into what we mean by mastering leadership, because leadership can take many different forms. So of course, we're talking about in a professional context mostly, but also how your personhood comes into it, especially when it involves executive leadership, because your personal brand becomes an extension of the company, becomes an extension of the company's strategy. And also, as you also alluded to in your book, authentic selling. So not just actual sales, which is the sales org of a company, but just it encompasses a lot of what every executive does, because personal branding is important. Personality is important, and understanding and respect for your employer, respect for yourself is very important to your brand and to your clients. And so I think that understanding how authentic selling is that the topics in the book are really relevant in general. So one of the first topics that I wanted to touch on is more about team building, which is, I guess, one of the key aspects of key aspects of executive leadership. You're nothing without your team, more or less. I live by that motto. Maybe you can explain how over the last decade, what you've seen as the most important characteristics of people that you have hired or let go in your sales orgs.
Sure. So yeah, there's a few things I can say about that. It largely depends on kind of what role you're hiring for, kind of the characteristics that you look for. So just to give you an example of this, in the sales world, and obviously there's more beyond sales, but just for the sake of example, we'll start there. In the sales world, you often have inside salespeople who are kind of cold calling and doing cold outreach all day. And then you have, account executives who are out trying to close deals. And then you have the leadership team. And there's a question that you ask in an interview, which is like, do you love to win or do you hate to lose more? Like, which one would you choose? And oftentimes the answer that you look for with an inside sales rep is that you want them to love to win, because their job is so monotonous and tedious that you want them to be chasing the win, right? Whereas for the account executive, the sale itself is very complex. And so you want the person to be driven more so by, you want them to almost expect to win. You want them to be more fearful of failure in that regard, right? So sometimes there are different questions that you ask when you're trying to source the right candidate for a different job. But if I were to just kind of cherry pick some of the trends that really matter the most, first and foremost, I would say that coachability is incredibly important. You need people that are receptive to getting better and not being defensive about being coached. And something that's kind of tied to that, I think, is accountability. People that have no accountability to their success or their failure very rarely succeed. It's people that have a growth mindset that are accountable for whatever they do that succeed. And when I say accountability, I mean that in a very broad way. There are sometimes things that happen that are not your fault, but they're still your responsibility. So for example, if I'm coaching an SDR, an inside sales rep, I actually once had an SDR who was overzealous, and he would sometimes.
Sorry, SDR, sales development rep, right? Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
So, yeah, okay. No, all good.
An inside sales rep, somebody who was doing cold calls. He was a little bit overzealous and would make a little bit, sometimes he would fib a little bit to try to get a meeting with a prospect. And it wasn't me who did that, but it was my responsibility that this person was doing that. And I had to I had to handle that situation. It was my response. I was accountable for that mistake, even though I wasn't the one who committed it. So accountability needs to be something of like extreme ownership, and that's what you look for in people. I guess, James, I was going to talk a little bit about how I do team building on my team. Is that something you were going to go to next? Or?
No, yeah, well, in general, like I was going to also speak about, so within the context of a high growth startup, so when you're funded by VCs, right, like that can lead to a high pressure situation. So I was going to just sort of, you're dropping gems already, coachability, accountability. This is something that anyone can sort of use when they're, managing a team of people, or even if they outsource something to a contractor, right? Like you want to know, how do I, in a structured way, sort of manage these people and their, my expectations for them, and also how do I assess what they're bringing back to me? Yeah. So I was going to touch on just that, like in this, ecosystem of this pressure cooker, more or less, right? Like they're getting all this money from VCs, which sort of, it intensifies the situation. And then also touch a bit on delegating, like how do you then sort of decide on where to delegate? That's a lot of things, but please pick and choose what you'd like to touch on, because you're dropping gems anyway.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, you'll see as we kind of have this conversation that there's going to be a theme about authenticity, which is oftentimes vulnerability as well. And so something that I like to do right off the bat with any group of hires that I have, and if I bring in new hires, let's say like I already have a team of 10, and I hire 5 new people, I do this again, right? I take the 10 people who've already done it, we do it all over again because we have 5 new people. I ask everybody, what is their why? Why are you getting out of bed every day to do this job? What is it that you want in your life? And you often have to ask that question like 5 times to get the right answer. So for example, if you were to ask me like, Jeff, why do you want to go work at sales at Cresta? I'm going to be honest, the answer is because I think I'm going to make a lot of money. I think I can make a lot of money at this job. I think that my stock can be worth a lot of money when it's all said and done. I can make a lot of commission and so on. But if I were to say that right now, everybody in the audience who hardly knows me will think, this guy, Jeff, seems like a weasel. He just wants to make a lot of money. He doesn't seem like a great guy. But, and in the interest of time, I'm going to like go down like 5 more whys. But like, when you ask me this question enough times, the real answer is that I want to be a screenwriter. And the reason I want to be a screenwriter is because I think the idea of touching people's lives and giving back to people is what matters the most to me. And that being a screenwriter is incredibly difficult if you have no money. You need to be able to fund your lifestyle if you're going to be a screenwriter. So sometimes at surface level, what people tell you is what motivates them is really not at all true. And this is true in sales too. That's why you have to ask a lot of questions to customers to get to the truth. But I do this exercise with my team, and I try to ask like, why are you here? What is it that you want in your life? Because at the end of the day, if you're in leadership at a company, you have this idea that the people that work for you love your company and that's why they're there. That's what you want. But at the end of the day, it's never true. Nobody just like shows up to work at their job because they're so passionate about, they can be passionate about it, but at the end of the day, it's almost always a means to some other end, right? And so when you get all of these things out on the table in the open, a couple things happen. First and foremost, the entire team starts to bond in a way that they would not have bonded otherwise. Because now I know, for example, I've had people on my team cry doing this exercise because, they're, let's say, they're the first generation college student and they saw their parents having to work multiple jobs growing up and they want to provide for their family. And like, it's a really deep, it can be a really powerful reason why this job matters to them. But suddenly there's an awareness from everyone else on the team that, oh, this person, like, this is like life or death for them. And in a way, it makes them more accountable to doing their job because it's not just their job or their life that's on the line now, it's everyone else. And now they understand what it means to everybody else that's on the team. The second thing that this does is that it grounds people in their why every single day when they're showing up for work. A lot of times when you go about your day, you just show up and you're going through the motions because it's what you do every day. You forget why you're there. And when you're being forced to talk about it, it changes that dynamic.
It's so interesting you bring up like the topic of, so I had mentioned delegating. That's less interesting than cohesion, actually. So like cohesion is something you just touched on. And I think that that's fascinating because, executive leadership and mastering leadership, as I've titled it, is not possible without a team that works cohesively, right? That can be agile, that can pick up the slack for others. It's sort of like a battalion mentality. When someone's falling behind, you help pick up the slack. And that's a really good, that's a really good way to make people, or sort of force people, I guess, to become more authentic when they share what their end goal is, right? Whether it's, I want to retire on a beach, or I want to own a mountainside villa, or I want to, whatever their goal is, then everyone else sort of knows a bit more about them and can become closer, but then that is what creates the cohesion. So it's really interesting that that's something that's also, so we've got cohesion, we've got accountability, authenticity, coachability. So these are all really good things that, I've personally not spent so much time thinking about, and think that in future I will. Okay, I wanted to touch actually on a topic we spoke about, in our pre-call, sort of, so pivoting. So with Next Caller, which was just acquired, as we say, toi toi toi, as we say in German, congrats on that milestone. Tell us more about the pivoting story. So how did that work? So there's we've turned the corner now from team building and now talking about, I guess, the business part and how the business case changed and how the money making drove these decisions. Tell us more about pivoting, as you mentioned last week.
Sure. So I need to give some context for those listening, I guess, to understand what we were doing and what we pivoted to. So the original concept for Next Caller was reverse phone number lookup. You could think of it as an advanced caller ID tool. So we could take a phone number. It was actually super creepy. We could take a phone number and we could tell you like 50 things about the person based on the phone number. We could tell you how much money they made, whether they had kids, all sorts of stuff. It was wild. We could tell you what their house looked like.
Very strange for privacy and security folks here.
Yeah, it was bad. But and it was great. It served a lot of purposes, right? So call centers could use it so they could identify who's calling them. They don't have to spend time identifying you. You could sell it to lead gen. You could sell it to marketers. The Gap, I sold a big deal to the Gap where they had a SMS campaign, people opting into their SMS program, and they wanted to reverse append all this data to understand how to do the segmentation in their marketing and things like that. So there were like a million use cases for this data. We got into Y-Combinator with this idea. We had, probably a few $1 million run rate. We had been building a sales team. We had some impressive logos. We had like Allstate, the Gap, Uber, Lending Tree, a bunch of other pretty solid brands that were using this product. And we had developed another product for fraud and authentication. It was basically telling you whether the call was being spoofed or not. So everyone who's listening, I'm sure, gets robodials on their phone or spam, people spoofing their phone number and calling you. So think about that in reverse, people spoofing a phone number to your bank, pretending to be you. They're spoofing your phone number to your bank, pretending to be you, and then taking all your money. Okay, so this happens a lot more than you would expect. And businesses spend a lot of time asking questions to make sure that it's you, and that's really expensive for them to do. So we had built this authentication tool that passively authenticates the call. And 4 years ago, let's say, I sold a
animal.
Yep.
So those have been actually a really good lesson on how to be agile as a team leader. So you have to then work with your team to get ready to sort of launch this new product. How did you manage that actually?
Yeah. So that was I'll be honest, that was a lot of trial by fire. When you're doing something for a little while and then you kind of stumble upon something that works, you need to start over and try to understand that space. And in a way, like the first deal that we sold was somewhat lucky because we weren't even positioning it the right way. We were positioning the tool for a certain value add for our first customer, and that they actually wanted the inverse of that value add. So we were positioning we were positioning it as a fraud tool to help you stop fraud. And the customer said, actually, we want the inverse. We want to authenticate more customers and make it easier for good people to come through. We don't really care about stopping fraud. Fraud's going to happen no matter what. So we didn't even know, we literally got lucky selling that first one because we didn't even know what the real value add was to the customer. But it requires, I think, some deliberate research and conversation. And something I always try to do whenever I start a new job or sell a new product is I try to seek out the thought leaders in the space. I try to interview them. And a lot of times they think it's a bunch of BS because they think I'm just trying to sell them something, but I'm very sincere. I actually do want to ask you some questions. Is this cool or what's not cool about it? Tell me what needs to happen to make it cool to you. So that's something that I always like to do, is try to seek out the people who matter, the people who are smart or who are perceived to be smart at least, and try to get an understanding of what would get them excited. I mean, a lot of it we learned through conversation. We were kind of dialoguing with people in the industry and trying to understand what mattered to people. And over time that evolves, and you have enough conversations, you start to understand what's resonating and what's not. And a lot of that too is like, you have to be pretty deliberate in collecting data. We were very data driven at that time. We were not always very data driven, but we became very, very data driven around that time and started really honing in on like every piece of information that we could possibly gather about every conversation, so that we could like really make some tweaks to what we were doing. And like one of the things, for example, that I uncovered during this data collection was something about integration. That was something that had we not thought about that early enough, could have been the doom for us, some of these like technical barriers that we were going to run into unless we got out ahead of them. So I think a lot of it was just deliberate conversation and good data collection.
Wow. That's, I guess, so after all of that, then eventually comes what just happened in the last few weeks, I guess. So it was acquired and now you're moving on to a new role. And I guess I kind of want to turn the corner and talk about like how you prepare yourself now to take on a new role. So after you've, worked so hard to build this company, and now it's helped build a company, and now it's moved on to the next stage, and you're going to move on as well. What are some of the aspects of like these leadership lessons that you've gleaned or that you've gathered from your past experience that will now carry you forward? And then I guess we can, also then talk about how this sort of was the inspiration for your book.
Sure. I think something that I learned, and this is probably honestly unique to me and not others. I think others don't suffer from this syndrome, but I work very quickly and I often shoot from the hip. And that's just how I am. I can't really explain how it came to be, but I like to move very fast, and oftentimes I don't always, think things through. And I try to make that my like advantage over others, that I'm like somebody who's like going to really hustle. And, there were enough mistakes that I made over 7.5 years while I was at Nextcaller, where I thought to myself, hey, if I had like really actually just kind of talked to one more person, or thought about that for 5 or 10 more minutes, or allowed myself a moment to think of like alternative scenarios to the one that I had just like come to first in my mind, that like I may have had a better outcome. And, so I think that was the big thing, is to be very intentional in everything that you do, especially in leadership. I think you can get away with it more as like an individual contributor or a rep, because it's really just you who ends up being affected when you screw up. But like when you're the leader of a team and you move too quickly, the entire team suffers. So, I think that one of the big takeaways I had was to just try to be a little bit more deliberate. And so, as an example of that, like as I'm going into my next role, I actually spent hours literally scraping all of my LinkedIn contacts to put into like a file, because I'm staying in the same industry, and to like actually game plan like who I'm reaching out to with what message and why, and how I'm prioritizing all of that. Like that's, rather than just like spray and pray on day one. Right. So I'm trying to be more thoughtful, more deliberate. And that goes to like how you approach conversations too, and that about how you approach each and every conversation with prospects. So that's probably the biggest one for me. It might be unique to me because I had kind of that. I don't know if everybody has that problem. It's, I don't know if everybody does, but that's something that I learned from.
It's something that I also, having come from Germany, 4.5 years ago to Silicon Valley. I'm originally from America, but I lived in Germany for over 7 years. And in Germany, things are very structured. And I think in many parts of Northern Europe, it's Northern and Western Europe, it's a bit more structured. Whereas in America, due to, I guess, the culture and the opportunity and the use it or lose it, very fast paced everything, shooting straight from the hip is sometimes very beneficial. And I had to learn. It wasn't hard to let chaos reign, because that's a part of the magic, whether we're talking sales, whether we're talking, I guess, the fortune that you happen upon an angel investor, a new seed investor, et cetera, when you're building a company here in Silicon Valley. Chaos has to be a part of the formula, and you cannot control it at all times and in all places. So I don't think it's unique to you in that it's a part of, some people have done the opposite, right? Like they have integrated a bit of the shooting straight from the hip and the chaos into their work style in order to also benefit from the just sheer inertia, or not inertia, the opposite of inertia. What is it, Moore's law?
Yeah.
Can't remember. Yeah, sometimes just sheer entropy is what needs that, let it reign so that you can also benefit from it. But of course, having a skilled and structured, deliberate approach is, there's nothing better than that. Great. So for the sake of time, because I don't want I want to give people a chance to also ask questions, I want to just touch now on your book. So, authentic selling is a really interesting title, because when people think of salespeople, of course, it's like, oh God, what is this person trying to sell me and how? So that's why I think touching on some of the topics in your book is probably very wise. You touch on empathy, you touch on authenticity, of course, as the title suggests, the rise in AI and machine learning, so analytics to sort of drive your strategy, your deliberate, outreach. Maybe you can talk about your top 2 or 3 topics from the book. I've named a few. One of my favorite is about letting failure be okay, which is something that I guess, the Silicon Valley credo from our Lord and Savior, Mark Zuckerberg in Silicon Valley, fail fast and move on, or break things and move fast, sort of. I guess it's sort of, yeah, similar to failure, but failing fast is definitely one of the credos of Silicon Valley. Please touch on 2 or 3 of the topics that you really think people that might resonate with, young executives now. So people who are up and coming in their industries and might be able to use in their daily work life.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start with that one. I guess before I do, let me, just give like just a basic preface to the book for those, I imagine most people haven't seen it before. So basically the premise of the book.
You can also share the title picture on your screen really quickly if you'd like. First.
I don't think I'm using a computer where I'm using a new computer. So I'll have to defer on my advertising, but I appreciate it. But it's called Authentic Selling: How to Use the Principles of Sales in Everyday Life. Basically, what I say in the book is that there's 2 reasons why authenticity is really important in selling. One is a practical reason, and one is I think a psychological reason. The practical reason that it matters today more than ever is because artificial intelligence and machine learning are taking over entire industries, the sales industry included. I don't know if anybody on this call has worked in sales, but there are platforms that can do a lot of the tasks that salespeople used to do. And in sales training programs, they're very formulaic. It says when a person says this, you say this other thing. When they ask this question, this is how you should respond. Well, guess what? You can teach a robot to do all the same stuff. So if you want to preserve your job in the long term, you need to embrace the one thing that you have that the machine does not have, which is your humanity and your authenticity. So there's a practical reason why this matters. And so you're going to lose your job. The second reason why it matters is because people who present authenticity is like presenting an honest version of yourself. People can tell when others are being honest and sincere, and it builds trust. Trust is the most important part of sales. And so I'll give you an example here. My mom is actually watching this, so she'll like this example. Let's say I have a baby, okay, and I could choose between having my mom babysit my kid or my friend who I went to Las Vegas with this past weekend and was partying with or something. Okay, I might, no disrespect to my mom, but I probably enjoy hanging out with my buddy in Vegas more than I might with my mom. But just because he's closer to me in age or whatever, at the end of the day, I'm going to choose my mom to babysit my kid because I trust her more, right? Trust is what matters. When you're trying to sell somebody something, there's this misconception in sales that you have to be this guy or a girl who's really charming or funny or witty or great presentation skills. That's completely erroneous. People buy from people that they trust. That's it. There's no other thing that matters. So that's number one. I mean, you talked a little bit about failure. Failure is people that fail and actually are accountable to their failure are admirable, because let's say somebody screws up something and they own it and they say, yeah, I screwed up, I'm really sorry. Whereas somebody screws up but doesn't admit it, in a way, you view that second person as not being authentic. They're not being true to themselves. They're actually kind of lying to your face. They know that they screwed up, but they don't have the self-confidence to tell you that they messed up. And so if you look at a lot of public figures, I actually use Dennis Rodman a lot as an example. Dennis Rodman, I know you're like looking at me like I'm crazy. Dennis Rodman.
I mean, he's friends with the North Korean dictator.
Yeah.
But...
I mean, but think about that. That says something. The fact that somebody as hostile to our country as the North Korean dictator wants to be friends with him tells you something about his authenticity. I'm not condoning that he's doing that, but my point is, like, it's
a high level geopolitical security risk. But okay.
It is. He's a strange guy. But he always owned it. He literally wore a wedding dress down Fifth Avenue and got married. And he was not nearly as good at basketball as Michael Jordan, but he's almost equally adored and was like acclaimed in the 90s because people loved that he was this person that owned everything about who he was. So you can, and he's had a lot of failure, but people root for him. I mean, there was a documentary that came out about him last year. I watched it. I felt bad for him when I was done watching this documentary. He went through a lot of stuff that people don't understand behind the scenes. And a lot of times we root for the underdog. We root for the person who doesn't succeed. In American culture, actually, we actually root a lot for people who are successful to fail. People don't like Tom Brady. I like Tom Brady because I'm a Patriots fan, but most people don't like Tom Brady. They don't like that he wins all the time. They want him to lose. So we want the people who fail to succeed. That's something that is, it's actually kind of unique to our culture, but it's something that is true. I'll give you one last, you asked for three.
So we want people who fail to succeed and people who succeed to fail, sort of. So we've inverted it a bit in the American cultural landscape, I guess.
I think so, yeah. I think sometimes there's an impression that people who succeed did it by, cutting corners or whatever, whether it's true or not. I think that's just a perception that people have. I'll give you one more. I was going to give you one. I'm going to give you a different one. The whole reason I wrote the book, I mean, there were a bunch of reasons I wrote it, but something that was going on last year, it's still going on today, quite frankly. It's been going on for a while. No, this has been going on for longer than that. It's our horrible political dialogue, and people calling each other names and not really. And what I've noticed when I was like engaging on social media with people is that they were very interested in being right. Nobody's interested in listening to others. They're interested in being right. And it's a biological phenomenon. If you think about all of the human history, the wars, the genocides, everything bad that has happened in human history has generally been one group's ideas trying to prevail over another group's ideas. People are very protective of their own ideas to the point where they will kill people over their ideas. And I talk in the book about empathy and something about having some sort of non-attachment to your own ideas. If you could believe in something, that's fine, but believe it like 99%. Don't believe anything like 100%. You need to be willing to be wrong about even things that you thought were like, obvious truths. You can't go into conversations with others with an agenda that you have all the information that the other person has nothing to give you. And that's true about being empathetic and understanding that even 99.9% of people who have opinions that infuriate you, I can promise you, they don't care about pissing you off when they come up with those opinions. That's just how view the
world. Yeah.
That's how they view the world. They have a completely different set of facts and information and experiences that brought them to that place. Now, whether they're right or wrong doesn't matter. The point is they don't go to bed every night with a poster on their wall with your face on it and like with a bullseye on your face. They're not trying to piss you off. So that's something that I think is important in sales, because when you go into a conversation with a customer, you can't have an agenda. You need to be empathetic to the person that you're talking to, and you need to go in there not assuming that you have something to give them. You might be wasting their time. You need to be 99% sure you have something to give them, but not 100%.
This is actually really interesting because, that you bring up empathy, because it really will, I guess, impact the sort of way you interact with people. You should always practice, not just self-respect, but also respect for the other. You treat others as you would want to be treated, as the golden rule states. That is actually what it boils down to. This brings up another point. So to me, in my head, because I mentioned last week, you're coming to work for a Palo Alto-based startup now in a couple of days. How do you, with that very West Coast culture, Silicon Valley culture, I, having worked with startups from both coasts and across the country, noticed that people on the West Coast work a bit more differently than East Coast. It's a bit more transactional on the East Coast. It's a bit more, upfront and in your face, whereas on the West Coast, it's a bit more synergistic. And if I may, a bit more empathetic. Mm-hmm. So do you have any thoughts about that? Or have you worked a bit with startups from the West Coast, and do you feel that it was a bit different? I mean, the pressure cooker of VC backing and all that notwithstanding.
Yeah, it can be. I think, we'll see how it goes when I get started. I think, what I'm going to be doing there, I'm going to be leading their Northeast function. So I'll still be kind of dealing with my own people, I suppose. But I do agree with you. Like, when I was in New York City, which is where Nextcaller was based, it is a very fast-paced, I don't know, like I escaped during the pandemic, and I've been in Cape Cod, and people might be surprised to think that was like something that was more exciting, but being in the middle of nowhere after being in New York City for a long time is actually very nice. Especially actually not in the summer when everyone's down there. I'm actually not looking forward to the summer when everybody comes down to Cape Cod. I've become like a curmudgeon-y old man after being in New York City. I just want to be left alone.
This is young executive circle.
yeah, the young curmudgeon circle, I guess, or something. But yeah, I San Francisco, I agree. The vibe there is very different. And I think it'll fit my personality more and like how I like to engage with customers. Now, that being said, these guys have, Sebastian Thrun, the creator of Google X, is the chairman, and and they've got Sequoia now. They've got Andreessen Horowitz. They've got Greylock. So I think there will still be some pressure to succeed because they've got the backing of like the three biggest investors in Silicon Valley that will not let them fail. So I think
Sebastian Thrun is an investor. He's an investor, yeah.
He's a chair. He's one of the co-founders.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, wow, that's interesting. He's German, actually. Yeah. I've been in touch with him a couple of times. He was at SAIL, I believe, the Stanford AI lab.
That's right. That's where the company.
It's born out of the AI lab at Stanford.
With two of his students, yeah.
Okay, amazing. Well, we'll set up some time, I guess, to discuss that. I mean, or if anyone has questions regarding it, I'm going to open it up because I don't want to take too much more time. Does anyone have questions, or are there particular things that Jeff touched on that someone might want to get a bit more insight on or about? Pardon my English.
Hi there. Yeah, I have a quick question. My name is Elena, and my question is about, in your opinion, what makes a good sales leader versus a good salesperson? As you're, thinking of.
Elena.
Yes, you got it. Ana Mañanes. Wonderful. It's a daunting one. Yeah. So again, what makes a good sales leader versus a good salesperson? I know as you're building a sales team, it's easy to kind of promote from within, but those skills don't always really translate well into leadership.
Yeah. I hope my answer doesn't bore you, because I think that the same quality is needed for both. And I opened the book talking a little bit about this because most people, when you ask them what's the most important attribute to have in any sales career, if they're new to sales, they never get the question right. When I say that, I mean, like, I've literally hired dozens of people and I've done this exercise and nobody's ever gotten it right. You'd think that someone would guess it right. Nobody ever gets it right. People talk about presentation skills. They talk about communication skills. They talk about clarity, persistence, hunger. Hunger is very important. And in fact, my chapter on hiring, I say that hiring is like the thing hunger is the most important thing you need to find in like a sales rep. You need somebody who's going to like really care because it's a hard job. But the thing is that hunger is needed for any job, right? Like, it's not particular to sales. What is particular to a sales rep or a sales leader that they both need is listening. They need to be able to listen. And for a sales rep, the reason they need to be a good listener is because their job is to listen to the customer and try to give them something that the customer needs. Like I said earlier, they can't go in with an agenda to just give the customer something that they think that the customer needs, right? You know, if we were having if me and James were just, you know, happened upon each other on the sidewalk and I said, oh, it's lunchtime, like, hey, James, like, you know, it'd be great. I think you look like you could use some Chinese food. Let's go get Chinese. James might be like, I don't know if I'm in the mood for that, right? Like if I don't listen to him, we're going to have something of an argument or something. But yeah, for a sales leader, it's true as well. Like the job of the leader is to understand the people on their team and to help motivate them to succeed. The job of the sales leader is to listen to the CEO and the board to understand what they're looking for and why, and to ask the right questions about why they want those things and when, and to go back to the team and ask them how they plan to deliver on those things or how they feel about those goals, right? So you need to be a really good listener in I think sales leadership and in just being an individual contributor. I think, you know, look, if you really want to press me to like give you a differing answer between the two, I think that patience is important for a sales leader. Patience is important because the people on your team presumably will grow with your coaching. And sometimes they'll do things that you don't like or things that, you know, frustrate you. And you need to be patient with them. You can't expect that, you know, everybody's going to be perfect all the time, and you need to be able to be patient with other people. And like I said before, I think that for an individual rep, hunger and persistence and I think something of like an emotional ability to what I call ride the roller coaster is important, because you can't get too down when you're having a bad time, and you can't get too high when you're having a good time either. I've gone through stretches of time where I've done horrifically, and I've questioned if I'm even good at this anymore. And you can't do that, because then like the doubt starts to creep into your interactions. Whereas sometimes I've had like really good month, just like a bunch of things that all kind of happened at the same time. And you have to remember, like, that was just that's how the cookie crumbled, right? Like you still got to show up the next day and keep going. So I think that those are maybe a couple other examples of things where, you know, maybe some differences in what you might look for between those two.
Okay, that's a really great answer. Did that answer you, Elena? Yes. Oh, she's still with us. Or
Yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Great. Any other questions? I mean, I had one more specifically about just, but I will wait, I'll defer. Does anyone else want to chime in?
I have one quick follow-up question, kind of unrelated. You touched on it just a second. Do you have any pro tips on scraping your LinkedIn contact list? I actually love that plan.
Yeah. So I felt like an idiot because I was doing this manually for hours. I was like doing it alphabetically, and I was scrolling down like by the alphabet. And then it turns out that you can actually just export the whole list into an Excel file. Yeah, it's like in your settings. You can Google it. It'll take you like 2 minutes to do this. But there was still a lot of work for me to do once I did that, because I not everybody, like most of my contacts are not relevant to what I do, right? I've you know, met a bunch of random people throughout my life, but there's probably like 1,000. I have like 7,000 connections. I think like 1,000 or maybe 1,500 of them are like relevant to the call center or customer service like space, which I'm selling into. So I had to like I still had to like comb through that, but getting the list exported saved me a lot of time. So I felt stupid once I felt really dumb once I figured that out, but you know, better late than never.
Great. Okay. So I wanted to just ask one more last question about how the future of machine learning will shape your role. I mean, of course, I mentioned, I think, the role that analytics will play in shaping a more deliberate approach to sales. And you've already mentioned how technology will shape what you're doing, especially with, you know, combing through your LinkedIn list. Maybe you can explain a little bit more explicitly for me and maybe for others who might be interested, how that will shape your future job. I mean, Cresta is explicitly AI enterprise company, but layered on that, like, that's what it sells. But within the company, how is it sort of shaping the way that people work within the company?
So is your question,
or did you mean by mentioning that also in your book that it's the industry more than the work modus? Like,
yeah, I meant more the industry. Like
okay.
I meant more. Yeah. So for example, yeah, I see where you're going. So like, I'll give you an example. Like there's a tool called Sales Loft where you can basically create cadences where like, you find a contact and you're going to send them an email, but then it automates all your follow-up. So you're not sending any of the emails. Like you'll send like one real email to this person, but then like a robot, like, well, not like a robot, but like your machine, the computer.
Those. Yeah, I hate those. So many SDRs do that after the cybersecurity RSA conference I go to.
Yeah, I've gone to RSA. Yeah, that you probably get a lot of that. So that's like one example, but like there's like, just trust me, there's millions of these. Like, okay, here's another one on inbound leads on websites. Rather than having a human being respond to the lead, there's like bots that respond. They'll say like, hey, so-and-so, I saw you were on our website. Let us know if you want to do a demo. Like, here's the link, right? Like these are like basic ways that AI are coming into the sales world. As far as like what it's going to do moving forward, it's a really interesting topic because I've heard a lot of different arguments. There's some people like Andrew Yang who think that this is like a really big deal and it's going to be a disaster and we need to give people a universal basic income because they're not going to have jobs. And then there's other people who say that with AI and like with more as we advance as a society, that it actually just creates more opportunities and more job opportunities. Like there's people on differing sides of this argument. And I think even within the AI space, there's an argument to be made about, are we going to use AI to replace and automate, or are we going to use AI to augment functions? So to give you an example of that, like the company I'm working for, Cresta, what they do is they take what the best customer service agents are doing and they coach the rest of the agents in real time to behave similar to the top agents. So they're using natural language processing and artificial intelligence to listen to conversations. Let's say that, you work at
sort of like Gong, sort of like what Gong
it's like Gong, but for call centers or customer service. And in that scenario, they're not removing call center agents. They're actually making it so that the like if call center agents have high churn, it's not a great job. They don't last in that role for very long before they get burnt out and move on. You can make their lives easier. You can train them to be like the top rep in real time and make their job easy. They actually want to stick around. So in a way, they're using AI to enhance job functions for people and to make it stickier for people to want to have those jobs. So that's an interesting dichotomy that you have here. You have some people saying AI is going to kill entire job functions. And then you have companies like my new employer, which are looking at this and saying, actually, we can do the opposite. We can use AI to make people smarter. So I think it'll be interesting. I don't know the answer. I was an English major in college. You're asking the wrong guy to predict the future. But I think it'll be interesting. That's what I'm going to have my eye on, is like, what path will we go down? Will be a little bit of both. We will have to keep our eye on that.
Okay. Well, I am now going to wrap it up, I guess. If no one else has any more questions, thank everyone for taking part. Jeff, thank you. Thank also your mom for being here, because you mentioned your mom was here. Thank you, Elena, for the questions. Very, very done. Polefaristo. As we say in Greek. But anyway, I'm going to let Yvonne take over. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Yvonne, please close us out.
Just wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you, Jeff, so much for your expertise and your words of wisdom. Thank you, James, for leading this fireside chat. And I hope that everybody got to take away some interesting points tonight. And we definitely hope to see you at another event. If you have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to email, and enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.